The way that I connect with materiality is such a integral part of my practice. So even though it's not necessarily apparent in some of the works, the story of going to collect the materials from the foreshore just down the road, 5-minute bike away from the studio, and collecting the fragmented clay pipes or rusted laughing gas canisters or limestone that I then crush up to make pigment and then to make paint. All these materials and going to actually find them or mudlark them and gather them is so much part of my practice. I feel like it's almost a collaboration between myself and the materials. There's something to do with digging underneath the surface that comes into that, so it's kind of about the duality of invisibility and visibility, and there's something within me that has always wanted to dig down and get beneath sort of structures and the systems that we've been preconditioned to accept or to believe in, even just from something as basic as language. Like, the language that we use isn't inherently meaningful, it's just a set of symbols, and we create meaning from it, but we speak in cliches, we speak in preconceptions, and those words create narratives, and those narratives create our worldview, and we just sort of believe it so often. We don't get underneath it and look for the truth or question things. And I think since I've been young at school, that was always obviously an issue, like I think it is for many creative kids. Schools, you question the teachers and you're like, but why should I do that? Like, tell me what's the reasoning. I think almost we sort of stop doing that as adults in a way. And so for me, going to the shore and finding my materials and dredging stuff up from the past, like segments from ships or shipwrecks or discarded oyster shells, basically anything that's had this whole stint of time in the sea and has been washed back up through the waves, it carries with it this sort of this history and this portal to another time that I wasn't around in. And by going there, and the action of picking them up is kind of getting underneath the surface of stuff. It's like a metaphor for digging and finding the tree. I think it's almost the archaeological act of digging kind of represents the action of or the willingness to look beneath presumed truths. So as an example, for me, what I really learned from my masters through the help of some incredible tutors was that I didn't really know why I was going to the shore, and so attracted to rusted or eroded or broken materials or objects. And it kind of became apparent that the action of doing that was almost a reflection or a metaphor, the action of therapy or self-healing or meditating, and consciously looking beneath the thoughts that you have that are just a product of belief systems that you've held for years that you haven't necessarily questioned, and that aren't necessarily helpful, and getting beneath them, whether it's through meditating and sitting and just observing those thoughts, or whether it's through a more direct form of therapy and kind of deconstructing those thoughts and really getting in there. I call them excavation techniques, so there are a lot of links with archaeology in my work, and the excavation techniques that I use to get underneath the surface to find my materials, and then on the canvas, once they're on the canvas, sort of sticking them on but then taking them away and digging beneath them. I might sand them off, or I might brush off some powder, or I might sometimes hammer them off. So the excavation techniques kind of vary in aggressiveness, I suppose, or directness, in the same way that different forms of becoming more self-aware can differ between quite light-hearted 5-minute meditation just to become a bit more aware of thoughts, to a rage room where you're literally going in there and you're facing head on with maybe some repressed anger or something like that. So it's kind of different ways of getting underneath to sort of the direct experience, because truth is too much of a vague word, but it's something about getting to the source of experience rather than theorizing about it or rather than speaking about it. And I think that's kind of what art is to me. It's like, and that's why it's so funny to talk about art, because it's almost like you start here making the art to get away from the talking and then you come back to talk about the art. But I kind of relate it to the right and the left side of the brain, where the right side of the brain linked to creativity and intuition and the body is much more of a direct experience where I'm just taking in life and experiencing life, whereas the left-hand side of the brain is much more of a kind of meta experience of life and a kind of analytical, but analysing, theorising, creating narratives, believing stories, like needing evidence and data to make sense of things. And I think that's why I use so much organic material, and I try to not use bought material where possible at all now, because I want to know where my materials come from. Something about the sea and the materials that I pluck from the shore, which have been washed up by the sea. The sea is this kind of body of water it's like visible on one level, we can see it at the surface, but then it's invisible and it holds all these secrets, you know, shipwrecks, species, fish, coral, all these things that we will never see. But it's so linked to also the visible world, you know, like tides are affected by the moon. The stories and secrets that are held within the sea that could be like centuries old then become washed up onto the shore, where it's this sort of realm of the visible land. So it's this idea of something that was invisible becoming visible, and then the act of me picking them up from the shore, taking them to my studio, making them into something new, and then they'll end up in a gallery somewhere. The journey, wherever they started, going through this sort of dissolving process of being in the sea for however long, ending up again in the visible realm, and then becoming something new. To me, that's such a beautiful metaphor for transformation, and whether that be healing, but also any kind of transformation. This idea of, sort of, I guess, redefining how we look at broken things or desolate spaces, whether that be psychic spaces or physical spaces, and seeing them not as inhospitable or forgotten or forgettable or invisible, but actually as places that are both ripe but also necessary for transformation. So it's like, you know, in my art practice, an old rusty laughing gas canister, you know, it goes from being something that's forgotten about, overlooked, discarded, and detached from its original use, you know, coming full circle and being re-contextualised and redefined as something totally new. So it's kind of inventing a new language that's sort of almost a symbol of hope, or detaching something's previous meaning from it, I guess, and giving it a new meaning that represents something more hopeful. So it's also about like getting out of our human-centric lens, away from like human created languages, and into something that's much bigger than us and bigger than what our brains and our egos can understand.